Hi everybody. In this lecture, I'm going to cover an introductory overview of what we call the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. This is something that's produced by the World Wide Web Consortium that describes initiatives and guidelines for making all content accessible to all people through different means. It could be someone with less technology. It could be someone with a disability. Regardless, the accessibility portion of this course is a very important part of creating user-centered content. We can't create user-centered content without catering to all users. So this is something to learn that will not only create a nice addition to your portfolios, but it'll also be something that's a part of what a lot of web developers don't have. They can look up web content accessibility guidelines, but we're trying to train you to approach every digital product with these in mind. So on a side note, I do get occasionally employers contacting me and looking for people who have experience with this. Now, that's part of the reason this is a course in this curriculum. We don't see, many web development curriculums at all, curriculi, but what's important is that this course will feed into the other courses, and that's kind of why it is the way it is. We do it, one of the first courses in the chain. So let's get started and start learning about this. There's going to be several lectures on the WCAG throughout the semester. So the guidelines themselves explain how to make the content accessible to people with disabilities. The guidelines from the W3 are intended for every single person who helps produce a digital product that's web-based. In other words, it could be a kiosk, it could be an Apple Watch, it could be any way, an Apple TV, for example, as a medium for the web. So anything that's driven through the internet is part of these guidelines. The goal, again, is to promote accessibility. We want to remember that we're focusing on all users and whatever user agent they are using. So a user agent is an important buzzword in this industry. The user agent is the device with which you access the digital product. Like I said, it could be an Apple Watch, it could be a kiosk, it could be an Apple TV, or a traditional Chrome browser on a laptop. So these include desk browsers, voice browsers, which do exist, that just read through and basically orate content, cell phones, even what you might see in your car, an automobile-based PC. All those fall under this umbrella. Everything in your car that has data driven through a wireless connection, and therefore is web content. So the constraints that anyone might be operating under, like, it's not just, we envision someone who maybe is visually challenged, who's trying to, navigate a web page. But it's more than that. It's someone in a noisy environment, someone in a room that has too much light, someone in a hands-free environment like a car. All of these things are areas of applicability for when you're producing web content, and this is such an important thing. So, our goal, help people get their content quickly. Help them find information on the web more quickly. You can still use images, video, all the things that you'd normally use. But we need to make those things accessible to a wider audience. For example, video might need a very long description. All right, so the WCAG itself, the content that exists inside of it, and you can see the link in the W3, and which we'll be going through, but I want you to see how this is organized. So there are two general themes, and those general themes have guidelines, which have checklists, checkpoints, and the checkpoints are in 3 different levels. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. So priority 1 is obviously first. 2 and 3 2 is a nice to have, 1 is a must have, 3 is a would be great if it had it. And the conformance levels are A, AA, and AAA. A meaning 1, priority 1, AA meaning priority 2, and AAA being priority 3. It's kind of confusing, but if we stick with the checkpoints, we can ensure that we're content accessibility guidelines compatible, and we can put a little marker on our websites at the bottom saying that we are WCAG compliant to the 2.0 in AA, which is kind of the goal. We want to follow the guidelines from WCAG 2.0 and AA. Okay. Themes. The first theme, and this goes back to our last slide, the general themes that we had. The first one is ensuring graceful transformation. All right, so this is important. What that means, and it comes from graceful degradation, the term graceful degradation, which is the opposite of progressive enhancement. You should see this in your reading. Graceful degradation needs to be defined first. That is when we design for the top level technology. So let's say I was doing a website and that website had 3D capabilities, hypothetically. And the only thing that could render that 3D is the new Apple iPhone 20. Okay, so what I'm doing if I'm gracefully degrading is I'm designing for the Apple 20 so they get the 3D. But all the content that's 3D becomes 2D for all the older devices. But it does it gracefully so that those people in those older devices don't know that they're missing anything. So the idea from graceful degradation, I always think about Apple because they're always pushing out new products and then not having the older phones be able to utilize those new products. So they sort of force you or pressure you to get the new phone. Well, graceful degradation would take care of the new phone first, but then trickle down to all the old phones so at least they get the same content, albeit in a less nice manner, but they still have access to it. So that's graceful degradation. Progressive enhancement is when we target the low end. In other words, when I do an e-commerce site, I don't want to lose any money, so I'm going to target the worst browser I can find and make sure it looks good in that. And then from then, as an afterthought, I'm going to add new fun features for the better devices. I'm going to progressively enhance the site so that eventually all the people with the new phones will have their 3D e-commerce site. But my primary goal is to make sure the lower end devices can access my shopping cart. And you would do that in e-commerce. It's sort of a way of a professional practice, if you will, in e-commerce because you want to not lose any money. If we have an e-commerce site that's only in 3D for the iPhone 20, we're going to lose money. So there are two theories and themes in play here. And with the WCAG, ensuring graceful transformation because we want everybody, all users, to have the top best content that they can, but have accessibility to that content. And those are the first 11 guidelines of the 14. The other theme is making content understandable and navigable. And those will be guidelines 12 to 14. So two themes. One is about all users accessing content, and two, making things understandable and navigable. Okay, so this is a little bit more on graceful transformation. The W3 defines graceful transformation as pages that transform gracefully and remain accessible despite physical, sensory, and cognitive disabilities, work constraints, and technological barriers. So no matter what, when we get down to the low level, when we have, an Apple Watch, for example, which is a physical constraint, it still works. So again, it transforms gracefully from the top level to the lowest level and make sure that everyone on all levels have access to the content. So what we do with graceful transformation is we separate structure from presentation. So what we'll have to do is we'll take a web page, for example, and take its content, okay, and separate that content from the design while keeping it in the design for people who can access that design, but knowing that the structure is going to be the content that people, let's say, are visually challenged would be able to enjoy. They can still listen to the content being read. Always provide text, including text equivalents, So you might be forced to, let's say you had a large paragraph of text, you might have to write a separate amount of text for a screen reader, so that the screen reader could know in a shortened, sort of concise manner what the content is. Now, text can be rendered in ways that are available to almost all browsing devices and accessible to almost all users through HTML5 tags. Will I teach those tags in this course? Yes, I will. If you don't know HTML, you can still benefit from that. All right. The other thing is creating documents that work even if the user cannot see or hear. So if they cannot see, it would be read to them verbally. If they cannot hear, it would be shown to them visually. Lastly, creating documents that do not rely on one type of hardware. Pages should be usable by people without a mouse, without trackpads, with small screens, low resolution, no color, even without a screen. So if we have a screen reader that only has voice or text output, we should still have our HTML documents be visible or be enjoyed. Consumed is a better word. Consumed by the user. All right, so theme 2. How do we make content understandable and navigable? By using the clearest language as possible. Clear and simple. That's why this course is called Creating User-Centered Content. It needs to be user-centered. Your language, your communication should be bulleted. If it's a sentence, it should be short, concise sentences. Of course, we're going to get into all that, but make it simple. You're reading the textbook. Don't Make Me Think by Krug. That's a big theme of what he does in his textbook. Also, provide understandable mechanisms for navigating within and between pages. So something like the tab bar, the tab key. If you can tab through all your navigation, it will be accessible. Also, providing navigational tools and orientation information in pages are going to maximize your accessibility and usability. So users, they're going to run the gamut. They're going to be a spectrum. Not all of them can make use of visual clues. Image maps, for example, are useless in most cases. Scroll bars, a lot of those are done and they can't be utilized by anybody but the person with the best technology. Think about side-by-side frames or graphics that guide sighted users of graphical desktop browsers. We have to provide navigational tools that will be alternate to those things. And a lot of this will be going on behind the scenes in the code. All right, just an overview still. We're going to go all over all this again during the semester, but priority levels. Priority 1 is what I said in a few slides back. It must satisfy the checkpoint. Otherwise, users will find it impossible to access information. This is a basic requirement for groups to be able to use web documents. Priority 1 should be always satisfied. The best sites I find satisfy priority 2, where we should satisfy the checkpoint. Otherwise, the groups find it difficult to access information. So this is the exact verbiage from W3. That's where I got it. So know that's why it's repeated the way it is in this slide. And lastly, priority 3 is may address this checkpoint. Otherwise, groups might find it somewhat difficult to access information. Priority 3 can be tough. When we start getting into it, you'll see that you have to take extraordinary measures to satisfy priority 3. Now, the conformance levels. A is when all priority 1 checkpoints are satisfied. AA is when all 1 and 2 are satisfied, which is, in my opinion, our goal. And lastly, AAA has all 3 checkpoints satisfied. But if we can get definitely A and possibly AA in our submissions, everything will be fine. So that's it for our introduction to WCAG. It's a big deal, and it needs to be in your resume. It will create separation between you and other developers going for a job.